The alarm inside the council chamber screamed before Nora Ellison even reached the doors. Red light pulsed along the curved walls, and every guard in the corridor turned to stare at her as she ran. She had exactly 4 minutes before the vote closed, and if she did not reach the podium in time, Earth's fate would be decided without a single human voice in the room. She burst through the towering doors, her boots skidding on the polished floor. The chamber was enormous, built for creatures far larger than her, with seating that rose in circles toward a domed ceiling made of shifting light. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of worlds turned to look at her. Some had scales, some had 4 eyes, some seemed to be made of moving smoke held together by thin metal frames. All of them were silent, waiting. At the center of the room stood the high seat of the council, occupied by a tall being named Zurl Thane, whose skin shimmered like dark glass. Around him sat the ruling committee, the ones who would decide, in the next few minutes, whether Earth would be given protection or handed over to a stronger species that wanted its resources. Nora had trained for this moment for 3 years. She was the youngest attaché ever chosen for Earth's delegation, and she knew every rule of council conduct, every phrase of diplomatic law. But none of that mattered now, because the moment she stepped onto the chamber floor, an announcement rang out that made her stomach drop. The vote had been moved up, not 4 minutes, 90 seconds. She heard gasps behind her from the human observation gallery, where a handful of other Earth representatives sat, unable to help her, unable to do anything but watch. Her mentor, a calm and steady man named Daniel Pierce, half rose from his seat, his face pale with alarm, but a guard stepped forward and blocked him from approaching the floor. Nora ran. She reached the small platform in front of the high seat, just as the countdown numbers appeared in the air above her, glowing bright and merciless. 90 seconds became 60. She had rehearsed a speech, a careful argument built on trade agreements and mutual benefit, and the small but growing value of human innovation. All of that vanished from her mind in an instant, replaced by pure fear. Zurl Thane's voice rolled out across the chamber, deep and unbothered, as if this were an ordinary afternoon and not the final moment of a planet's future. You have 60 seconds, human. Speak, or your world's status will be finalized without further hearing. Nora opened her mouth to begin the speech she had memorized. Nothing came out. The council members watched her with the mild curiosity of creatures who had seen 1,000 desperate pleas before, and were rarely moved by any of them. Somewhere behind the high seat, a large screen displayed a live image of Earth, turning slowly in space, utterly unaware that its future was being decided in a room full of strangers. 40 seconds. She thought of her mother back in a small town, unaware that anything was happening today. She thought of the billions of people living ordinary lives, going to work, raising children, arguing over small things, never imagining that somewhere among the stars, their whole world hung by a thread. She thought of every argument she had prepared, every statistic about human potential, and she realized none of it would matter to beings who had already decided humanity was too young, too unpredictable, too small to be worth saving. 20 seconds. And in that moment, something inside her broke free from the training, from the protocol, from every careful lesson about how a diplomat should behave. She did not choose it. Her knees simply gave out beneath her, and she dropped to the chamber floor in front of the entire Galactic Council, in front of every delegate, every camera, every recording device that would carry this moment across 1,000 worlds. Gasps rippled through the chamber. No delegate in council history had ever knelt before the high seat. It was not part of any protocol, not a gesture any species in the room even recognized. Zurl Thane leaned forward slightly, his glassy face unreadable, waiting to see what this strange, small creature would do next. Nora lifted her face and looked directly at him. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Please don't take our home. We are not asking for power. We are not asking for territory. We are asking for time. Give us time to prove we deserve to stay." 10 seconds. Her hands were shaking against the cold floor. She could feel every eye in the chamber on her, could feel the weight of billions of lives resting on words she had never planned to say. The countdown reached its final numbers, and the chamber fell into a silence so complete that Nora could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. 5 seconds. Zurl Thane raised one long hand, and the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the sound that would end everything. The countdown hit 0, and the tone that followed was not a bell of acceptance. It was a flat, cold chime, the sound of rejection. A wave of murmurs spread through the alien delegates, some clicking, some humming, some simply turning away, as if the matter no longer interested them. Zurl Thane lowered his hand slowly and looked at Nora with something that might have been curiosity, or might have been pity. "The Council has heard your plea, human," he said, "and the Council has decided. Earth's protective status is denied. Resource reallocation will proceed as scheduled." Nora remained on her knees, unable to move, unable to speak. Around the chamber, the alien delegates began to rise, gathering their things, already moving on to whatever business came next, as if the destruction of an entire species and its home was simply another line item on a long agenda. To them, her plea had been a curiosity, a strange display of weakness from an emotional young species that clearly did not yet understand the proper way to conduct itself among the stars. But in the human observation gallery, something very different was happening. Daniel Pierce stood completely still, staring down at the young woman kneeling on the chamber floor. Beside him, a woman named Grace Whitfield had both hands pressed over her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. A quiet young man named Owen Bailey, who had barely spoken since arriving at the council months earlier, gripped the railing in front of him so hard his knuckles turned white. None of them had expected this. None of them had expected to watch a colleague break every rule of diplomatic conduct and beg, on her knees, in front of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. And none of them had expected to feel what they felt in that moment. A surge of something raw and unshakable rising up inside each of them, something that had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with what it meant to be human. Nora finally rose to her feet, her legs unsteady, her face wet with tears she had not noticed falling. She looked up at the human gallery, expecting to see disappointment, expecting to see the quiet, controlled disapproval of colleagues who valued composure above all else. Instead, she saw Daniel Pierce beginning to clap, slow and deliberate, the sound echoing through the vast chamber even as the alien delegates continued filing out, uninterested. Grace Whitfield joined him, then Owen Bailey, then one by one, every human in the gallery rose to their feet. It was not a celebration. Earth's status had just been denied. The danger was as real as it had been an hour earlier, but something had shifted in that room, something the Alien Council had not intended and would not have understood, even if they had noticed it at all. For the first time since humanity had joined the galactic community, its representatives were standing together, united not by strategy or protocol, but by the simple, undeniable sight of one of their own, refusing to give up, even when giving up would have been so much easier. Nora Ellison did not know it yet, standing alone on that chamber floor with her knees aching and her voice raw, but the vote that had just been lost was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something the galaxy had never seen before, and something it was about to be forced to reckon with, whether it wanted to or not. 3 hours after the vote, Nora sat alone in a small transit room near the edge of the council station, still wearing the same clothes from the chamber floor, still feeling the ache in her knees. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the station's life support systems, and through the wide window she could see ships moving in slow orbit, some arriving, some departing, none of them concerned with what had just happened to her small, distant world. The door slid open without warning, and Daniel Pierce stepped inside, followed closely by Grace Whitfield and Owen Bailey. Their faces were tense, and Daniel was holding a small data tablet in his hand, the screen glowing with lines of alert text. "We have a problem," he said, "and it is bigger than the vote." Nora stood up quickly. "What kind of problem?" Grace answered before Daniel could. "The resource reallocation fleet is already moving. They didn't wait for the formal transfer period. A ship called the Aurelian Vanguard has changed course, and its heading puts it on a direct path to Earth's system. If our calculations are right, it will arrive in under 30 hours. Nora felt the floor seem to tilt beneath her. 30 hours. The Council had denied Earth's protection only 3 hours earlier, and already a fleet was moving to claim what it now considered its property. She had expected weeks of bureaucratic delay, months of paperwork and formal transfer procedures. She had not expected this kind of speed, this kind of ruthlessness. "That's not standard procedure," she said. There are supposed to be review periods, appeal windows, at least 90 days before any physical fleet movement. Owen Bailey, usually the quietest person in any room, spoke up with unexpected sharpness. It isn't standard. Someone pushed this through early. Someone wanted Earth claimed before any appeal could be filed. Daniel nodded grimly. We think it might be Councillor Thane himself. He has close ties to the mining consortium that filed the original claim on Earth's resources. If the fleet arrives and begins extraction before any appeal is processed, the claim becomes permanent under Council law. There's a clause buried in the original charter. Once resource extraction begins, the transfer cannot be reversed, no matter what happens afterward in the courts. Nora's mind raced. So we have 30 hours to stop a fleet from reaching Earth, or lose our world permanently, with no legal path to get it back. That's the situation, Grace said quietly. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The four of them stood in the small room, the weight of what Daniel had just described settling over them like a physical thing. Then Nora straightened her shoulders, wiped the last traces of dried tears from her face, and asked the only question that mattered. What can we do? Daniel exchanged a glance with Grace before answering. There is one option. It's risky, and it might not work, but it's the only thing we have. There's an emergency appeal process built into Council law, one that almost nobody uses because it requires something the Council rarely grants. What does it require? A direct hearing with the full Council, called before the fleet reaches its target, based on new evidence. If we can present something the Council did not consider during the original vote, something that changes the legal standing of Earth's claim, we can force a delay, at least long enough to stop the fleet before it begins extraction. Nora felt a spark of hope cut through her exhaustion. Do we have new evidence? This time, Owen answered, pulling a small device from his jacket and setting it on the table between them. It projected a shimmering blue display, filled with strings of alien text and complex diagrams. I've been going through the original resource claim filed by the mining consortium, he said. It's old, filed almost 40 years ago, long before Earth was even discovered by any Council member species. The claim was based on a survey that listed Earth's system as uninhabited. But that survey is wrong. It has to be wrong, because human civilization existed then too. If we can prove the original survey was flawed, the entire claim becomes invalid, not just delayed, invalid. Grace leaned over the display, her eyes narrowing as she studied the data. This could work. If the original survey missed clear evidence of a technological civilization, the claim was fraudulent from the very beginning. But we would need proof, something undeniable, something the Council cannot dismiss. Nora looked at the glowing display, her mind already working through the problem. We have historical records, old radio broadcasts, some of the earliest ones, going back almost 100 years. If any of those signals were already traveling through space at the time the survey was conducted, it would prove that any competent survey should have detected clear signs of intelligent life. Daniel's expression shifted, a flicker of cautious hope breaking through his tension. That's exactly the kind of evidence we would need. But there's a problem. Those records exist on Earth, in old archives. We don't have direct access to them from here, and even if we did, transmitting that much data across this distance would take time we don't have. Nora thought quickly, running through everything she knew about the station's systems, about the layout of the Council complex, about anyone who might be able to help them. Then a name surfaced in her memory, someone she had met only once, months earlier, during an orientation tour of the archive district. There's someone who might be able to help, she said. Her name is Lucy Bramwell. She works in the Historical Preservation Office here on the station. She showed our delegation around when we first arrived, and she mentioned that Earth's early broadcast archive had already been partially digitized and stored on a secure Council server, as part of a cultural preservation initiative years ago. If that's true, we might not need to transmit anything from Earth at all. The data might already be here. Grace looked skeptical. That's a long shot. And even if the data exists, we would need someone with proper authorization to access it, especially with everything happening so fast. I know, Nora said, but it's the only lead we have, and we don't have time to look for another one. Daniel studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we go now. Every hour we spend deciding is an hour the fleet gets closer. They left the transit room together, moving quickly through the winding corridors of the council station. The station itself was a strange, sprawling structure, built and rebuilt over centuries by dozens of different species, each adding new sections in their own architectural style, so that hallways sometimes shifted without warning, from cold metal corridors to warm, organic tunnels lined with something that resembled living wood. As they walked, Owen kept glancing nervously over his shoulder, and Nora noticed it, a small habit that made her uneasy. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "I keep feeling like someone is watching us," he admitted. "Probably nothing. Probably just nerves after today." Nora wanted to believe him, but a small, cold feeling settled in her stomach anyway. If Counselor Thane really had pushed the fleet's timeline forward to prevent any appeal, it seemed unlikely that he would simply allow 4 human delegates to wander freely through the station, gathering evidence against his own interests. They reached the archive district after nearly 20 minutes of walking, arriving at a modest office tucked between 2 much larger administrative buildings. Lucy Bramwell was there, a tall woman with kind eyes and an easy, welcoming manner, surprised but pleased to see them again. "I remember you," she said, looking at Nora with genuine warmth. "You ask so many questions during the tour. Most delegates just want to see the important artifacts and leave." Nora forced a small, tired smile. "I need your help with something urgent, and I don't have much time to explain everything." Lucy's expression shifted immediately, the warmth replaced by focused attention. "Tell me what you need," Nora explained quickly, describing the fleet, the 30-hour window, the flawed survey, and the historical broadcast archive that might hold the proof they needed. Lucy listened without interrupting, her fingers already moving across a control panel embedded in her desk as Nora spoke. "I remember that preservation project," Lucy said once Nora finished. "It was part of a cultural exchange initiative years ago, long before your species even joined the Council. We digitized samples of early broadcast signals from dozens of newly discovered worlds, including Earth, as part of an effort to document first contact history. If the data still exists, it should be in the deep archive." "Can you access it?" Grace asked. "I can try," Lucy said, though her voice carried a note of caution. "Deep archive access requires special authorization. I have general archive privileges, but pulling historical broadcast data for use in an active council proceeding is a different matter entirely. It could take time to process the authorization request through normal channels." "We don't have time for normal channels," Daniel said. "The fleet is already moving." Lucy studied each of their faces, seeing clearly the desperation behind their calm words. Then she made a decision, her jaw setting with quiet determination. "There's a faster way, but it isn't exactly within protocol. As a preservation officer, I have emergency override access I'm only supposed to use to protect archive material from imminent destruction. If I can classify this as an emergency preservation action, I might be able to pull the data without waiting for standard authorization. It's a stretch of my actual authority, and if anyone questions it, I could lose my position here." Nora met her eyes steadily. "I won't ask you to risk everything for us if you're not willing. But if you help us, you might be the reason an entire world survives the next 30 hours. Lucy held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded firmly, and turned back to her console, her fingers moving quickly across the controls. "Then let's not waste any more time talking about it," she said. The screen in front of her flickered through layers of security prompts, each one taking precious seconds to bypass. Nora watched, her heart pounding, aware of every minute slipping away, aware that somewhere in the darkness beyond the station, a fleet of ships was drawing steadily closer to everything and everyone she had ever loved. The security prompts finally cleared, and a long list of archived files appeared on Lucy's screen, organized by planet and date. She scrolled quickly until she found a folder labeled with Earth's coordinates, then opened it to reveal hundreds of small audio files, each one a fragment of an early human broadcast, some barely more than static, and a few clear words. "There," Lucy said, pointing to a cluster of files near the top of the list. "These are dated. If any of them predate the original survey mission, we have exactly what we need." Nora leaned closer, scanning the dates alongside Daniel and Grace. Her breath caught when she found it, a file labeled with a date more than a decade before the original council survey had supposedly declared Earth's system uninhabited. "This one," she said, her voice tight with excitement. This broadcast predates the survey by 12 years. If this signal was already traveling through space when the survey ship passed through our system, there is no way a competent scan could have missed it. Radio signals like this would have been clearly detectable using any standard sensor array from that era. Lucy nodded, already preparing to copy the file into a secure evidence package. This is strong. But strong evidence alone might not be enough. The Council will want a full technical analysis showing exactly how the survey should have detected this signal and why it apparently did not. Owen, who had been quiet for several minutes, finally spoke up. I can build that analysis. I have training in signal processing from before I joined the diplomatic corps. If Lucy can get me technical specifications for the sensor equipment used during the original survey, I can calculate exactly what should have been detected and compare it directly against what the survey report claims. Where would we get those specifications? Grace asked. Public Council engineering records, Owen said. Every survey ship's equipment specifications are supposed to be a matter of public record, precisely so that claims like this can be verified later if questions ever arise. Lucy was already typing, pulling up another database. This should be straightforward, she said, though her brow furrowed slightly as the search results loaded slower than expected. That's strange. What's strange? Daniel asked. The specifications for that particular survey ship have been marked as restricted, Lucy said, frowning at her screen. That's unusual for standard equipment records. Someone flagged this specific file for restricted access, and the flag was set only a few hours ago. A cold silence fell over the room. Nora felt the earlier uneasy feeling return, sharper this time. Someone was already working to block them, and the timing made it painfully clear who that someone likely was. They know we're looking into this, Owen said quietly. Grace's expression hardened. If Councillor Thane really does have ties to the mining consortium, he would have every reason to make sure this particular piece of information stays hidden until after the fleet completes its extraction. Nora felt anger rising alongside her fear, a fierce, protective anger on behalf of everyone back home who had no idea any of this was happening. We can't let one restricted file stop us. There has to be another way to get those specifications. Lucy thought for a moment, her fingers drumming against the edge of her console. There might be. The engineering department keeps physical backup records in a secure storage facility on the lower levels of the station, separate from the digital archive. Physical records aren't subject to the same access restrictions as digital files, since the restriction flag was only applied to the digital database entry. If the backup copy still exists down there, we could retrieve it directly. How far down? Daniel asked. 6 levels below where we are now, Lucy said. It's not a place delegates usually go. Security is lighter than in the main archive, since almost nobody knows the physical backups even exist anymore, but there will still be some automated monitoring systems along the route. Nora looked around at the small group gathered in the office, each of them tired, each of them afraid, and yet none of them suggesting they should give up. Then let's go get it, she said. They left the archive office as a group of 5 now, moving quickly through a series of narrower, less traveled corridors that Lucy guided them through, with clear familiarity. The architecture here was older, the walls scuffed and worn from centuries of use, the lighting dimmer than in the polished halls of the main council chambers above. As they descended level by level through a series of narrow lift shafts, Owen's earlier nervousness returned, and this time Nora felt it too, a prickling sense of being watched that she could not shake no matter how many times she told herself it was only stress. Halfway down, as they stepped out of a lift onto a quiet, dimly lit level, Grace suddenly grabbed Nora's arm and pulled her back against the wall, gesturing for silence. Nora froze, her heart hammering, and listened. Footsteps. Coming from a side corridor just ahead, moving with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who had every right to be there and no reason to hide. A moment later, 2 tall figures in the dark gray uniforms of council security passed across the intersection ahead, pausing briefly to scan the corridor with small handheld devices before moving on. That's not routine patrol, Lucy whispered once the footsteps faded. Security doesn't normally scan this level. Someone specifically assigned them to check this area. They're looking for us, Owen breathed. Nora's mind raced through their options. If Council security found them accessing restricted engineering records without proper authorization, it would not just end their mission to save Earth, it would likely result in immediate expulsion of the entire human delegation from the Council station, and possibly formal charges that would make any future appeal impossible. "We need another route," she whispered. Lucy nodded and led them along a narrow side passage, one that clearly saw far less traffic than the main corridors. Thick dust visible along the edges of the floor despite the station's usually meticulous maintenance. They moved quickly and quietly, Nora's pulse pounding in her ears with every step, every distant sound making her flinch. After several tense minutes, they reached a heavy door marked with faded symbols indicating engineering storage. Lucy produced a small keycard from her jacket and pressed it against a panel beside the door. For a horrible moment, nothing happened, the panel blinking red, and Nora felt despair rising in her chest. Then the panel shifted to green, and the door slid open with a low mechanical groan. Inside, the storage room was filled with rows of dusty containers, each labeled with faded text in the same alien script Nora had seen throughout the station. Lucy moved quickly along the rows, scanning labels, her lips moving silently as she read. "Here," she finally said, pulling a small container from a shelf near the back of the room. "This should be it, dated to match the survey ship in question." She opened the container carefully, revealing a small data crystal, nestled inside protective padding. Owen took it gently, examining it under the room's dim light. "This is exactly what we need," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I can extract the specifications from this directly, no digital restriction flags to worry about." Before anyone could respond, a sharp alarm suddenly blared through the corridor outside, red light flashing beneath the storage room door. Nora's stomach dropped. "Someone triggered a security alert," Grace said, her voice tight. Lucy moved quickly to the door, peering through a small gap. "2 security officers are heading this way, moving fast. They must have detected our access to this storage level." Nora looked at Owen, still holding the precious data crystal, and then at the others, fear and determination warring inside her. "We can't lose this now, not after everything." Daniel stepped forward, his usual calm composure returning even in the midst of the crisis. "There's a service corridor on the far side of this room," he said, pointing toward a small maintenance hatch half hidden behind a row of containers. "I noticed it on the station schematics during orientation. It connects back toward the archive district through a maintenance route, rarely used by anyone outside engineering staff." "Can we make it before they reach the room?" Grace asked. "We have to," Nora said. They moved quickly, Lucy leading the way toward the hatch, while Owen carefully secured the data crystal inside a protective case. Behind them, the sound of the security officer's footsteps grew louder, sharp and urgent against the metal floor. Just as Daniel pulled open the maintenance hatch, Nora heard a voice call out from the main door of the storage room, sharp and commanding.
"Stop!"
"Identify yourselves immediately." Nora's heart slammed against her ribs. Without thinking, she grabbed Owen's arm and pulled him through the hatch after the others, Daniel sealing it behind them, just as the storage room door burst open. The maintenance corridor beyond was cramped and dark, filled with humming pipes and thick bundles of cables, but it was clear, and it was theirs. They moved as quickly as the narrow space allowed, Lucy guiding them through a series of twisting turns, the sound of distant alarms fading gradually behind them. Nora's lungs burned, her legs aching from the earlier ordeal in the council chamber, and now this desperate flight through the station's hidden passages. But she did not slow down, could not slow down, not with everything at stake. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged through another hatch into a quiet corridor near the archive district, breathless and shaken but safe, for the moment. Lucy sealed the hatch behind them and leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "That was too close," she said. Nora looked at the small protective case in Owen's hands, holding the data crystal that might be the only thing standing between Earth and destruction. "We got it," she said quietly. "That's what matters." Owen nodded, already moving toward a nearby terminal to begin extracting the technical specifications they so desperately needed. As he worked, the rest of them stood watch, exhausted, afraid, and yet united by something that had not existed among them just hours earlier, a fierce, unshakable resolve to save their world, no matter what it cost them personally. Grace glanced at the clock displayed on a nearby wall panel, and her expression tightened. "22 hours left," she said quietly. "We need to move faster." Nora looked around at the small group who had, in the span of a single desperate day, become something more than colleagues, something closer to family, bound together by shared purpose and shared danger. She thought of the billions of people back home, still unaware of how close they stood to losing everything, and she felt the last traces of doubt harden into something unbreakable. "Then let's finish this," she said. "Let's give them a reason to listen." Owen worked quickly at the terminal, feeding data from the crystal into a comparison program he had built from memory, cross-referencing the survey ship's actual sensor capabilities against the signal strength of the broadcast Lucy had pulled from the archive. Nora paced nearby, unable to sit still, watching the numbers scroll past on the screen without fully understanding them, trusting Owen's steady hands to find what they needed. After several long minutes, Owen sat back, exhaling slowly. "I have it," he said. The survey ship's sensors were more than capable of detecting a broadcast this strong from twice the distance they would have needed. There is no scientific explanation for how they could have missed it, unless the scan was never properly run at all, or the results were deliberately altered afterward. Grace leaned over his shoulder, studying the analysis. "This is solid. This is exactly the kind of evidence an emergency appeal requires." Nora felt a fragile flicker of hope. "Then we're ready. We can file for the hearing." Lucy shook her head slightly, her expression cautious. Having evidence is only the first part. To trigger an emergency hearing, someone with council standing needs to formally sponsor the petition. As delegates from a newly admitted species, none of you have that authority on your own. You need an existing council member willing to bring this before the full assembly on your behalf. Daniel's jaw tightened. And given what we now know about Councillor Thane's involvement, finding a council member willing to challenge him publicly, especially on short notice, will not be easy. Nora thought hard, running through every interaction she had observed during her 3 years attending council sessions, searching for any delegate who might be sympathetic to Earth's cause. Then, a memory surfaced, faint but persistent. "There's a delegate named Selvenna Croy," she said slowly. "She represents a small water world near the Outer Rim, one of the newer member species, admitted only about a decade before us. During one of the general sessions last year, she spoke out against a resource claim very similar to ours, arguing that newer species deserved stronger protections during their early years of council membership. She lost that vote too, but she was vocal about it, more vocal than most delegates ever are." "Do you know where to find her?" Grace asked. "I don't," Nora admitted, "but the assembly directory should have her office location." They found the information quickly, and within minutes were making their way toward the residential district, where visiting delegates kept private offices during council sessions. The corridors here were quieter, lined with doors marked in a dozen different alien scripts, each representing a member world somewhere among the stars. Selvenna Croy's office was near the end of a long hallway, and when Nora knocked, there was a long pause before the door finally slid open. The delegate who greeted them was unlike anything Nora had seen before. Tall and slender, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer faintly under the corridor lighting, and large dark eyes that studied the group with obvious surprise. "Human delegates," she said, her voice carrying a musical, layered quality. "This is unexpected. I heard about what happened in the chamber earlier today. All of the station has heard about it by now." Nora stepped forward, forcing steadiness into her voice despite her exhaustion. "Then you already know we need help. Our world's fate was decided in 90 seconds, based on an appeal process that gave us almost no chance to speak. We've since found evidence that the original resource claim against Earth was based on a fraudulent survey, one that deliberately missed clear signs of intelligent life. We need an emergency hearing before the fleet reaches our system, and we need a council member to sponsor the petition." Selvenna's expression grew serious as she listened, her large eyes flickering toward the small case Owen still carried protectively against his chest. "May I see this evidence?" They stepped inside, and Owen quickly displayed the data on a small portable projector, walking Selvenna through the technical analysis, while Nora, Grace, and Daniel watched anxiously. The delegate studied the information for several long minutes in complete silence, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up. "This is compelling. If accurate, it would indeed invalidate the original claim entirely, not merely delay it. But I must be honest with you. Sponsoring an emergency petition against Councillor Thane carries significant risk. He holds considerable influence within the council, and those who challenge him publicly do not always find their own interests protected afterward. Nora held her gaze steadily. I understand the risk to you, but if you don't help us, an entire world will be lost within the next 20 hours, based on evidence that we believe was deliberately falsified. I can't ask you to ignore that risk to yourself. I can only ask you to consider what happens if nobody is willing to take it. A long silence stretched between them. Then Selvena's expression softened slightly, something like recognition passing across her pale features. When my own world joined the council, she said quietly, we faced something similar during our first difficult decade of membership. Older species saw us as resources to be managed, not partners to be respected. Nobody stood with us then. I have never forgotten what that felt like. She straightened, her decision visibly forming. I will sponsor your petition, but we must move immediately. Emergency hearings require a minimum quorum of council members present, and gathering enough support before the fleet's window closes will not be simple. Relief flooded through Nora, so strong it nearly buckled her knees again. Thank you, she said. Truly. Selvena was already moving toward her desk, activating a formal petition interface built into the office's main terminal. As she began entering the emergency filing, a soft chime sounded from the door, and it slid open without warning, to reveal 2 council security officers standing in the corridor outside, along with a third figure Nora recognized immediately from the chamber earlier that day, a tall aide who served directly under Councillor Thane. Delegate Croy, the aide said smoothly, his tone polite but carrying an unmistakable edge. We have received reports of unauthorized access to restricted engineering records earlier today, traced to individuals matching the description of your current guests. Council security would like to speak with them regarding this matter. Nora's heart pounded, fear spiking sharply through her chest. If they were detained now, the emergency petition would never be filed in time. Selvena did not hesitate. These delegates are currently under my diplomatic sponsorship in connection with a formal emergency petition I am filing before the full council. Any security inquiries regarding their conduct will need to wait until after this petition has been properly submitted, in accordance with council procedural law. The aide's expression flickered with irritation, quickly masked behind practiced politeness. I'm afraid the matter is time-sensitive, delegate.
So is mine,
Selvena replied, her musical voice suddenly edged with steel. Unless you are prepared to formally obstruct a sponsored emergency petition, which carries its own serious procedural consequences, I suggest you allow me to complete my filing. The aide's dark eyes narrowed, clearly recognizing that he had no legal ground to push further without risking consequences of his own. After a tense moment, he inclined his head stiffly. Very well, but this matter will be addressed once the petition process concludes. He turned and left, the 2 security officers following close behind, though Nora noticed one of them glance back with a lingering, suspicious look before the door slid shut once more. The room exhaled collectively, tension easing only slightly. That was Thane's aide, Daniel said grimly. He knows exactly what we're doing. Then we need to move even faster, Selvena said, turning back to her terminal with renewed urgency. I am submitting the petition now. Her fingers moved swiftly across the controls, and moments later, a confirmation chime sounded, followed by a notification displaying across the screen in glowing alien script. Selvena read it quickly, then looked up at the group gathered anxiously around her. The petition has been accepted for emergency review, she said. A hearing has been scheduled before the full council, set to begin in 3 hours. 3 hours, Nora breathed, both relief and fresh anxiety washing over her. That's not much time to prepare. It is more time than we had an hour ago, Grace said quietly. Selvena nodded in agreement. I will need to notify enough council members to establish quorum before the hearing begins. That itself will take most of the time remaining. In the meantime, I strongly suggest all of you prepare exactly what you intend to present, and prepare it carefully. Councillor Thane will not accept this challenge quietly. He will fight to discredit your evidence, and he will fight to discredit each of you personally if given the opportunity. Nora looked around at the small group who had risked everything alongside her over the past several hours, at Daniel's steady resolve, Grace's sharp focus, Owen's quiet brilliance, and Lucy's unexpected courage in stepping so far beyond the boundaries of her ordinary duties. Whatever happened in the next 3 hours, she knew she would not face it alone. "Then let's make sure he doesn't get that opportunity," she said. Outside, somewhere beyond the station's thick walls, the Aurelian vanguard continued its steady approach toward a small, unsuspecting blue planet, its crew unaware that a handful of determined people, human and otherwise, were racing against every remaining minute to stop it before it was too late. The 3 hours before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation, the small group gathering in Selvena's office to organize every piece of evidence into a presentation clear enough for the full council to understand within the strict time limits of an emergency session. Owen refined his technical analysis, again and again, tightening every argument until it could not be easily challenged. Grace drafted the formal legal language required to properly invalidate the original claim. Daniel coached Nora on how to present the evidence calmly and clearly, without repeating the emotional collapse that had marked her first appearance before the council. "You don't need to kneel this time," he told her gently, near the end of their preparation. "You have something stronger now. You have proof." Nora nodded, though a part of her doubted that proof alone would be enough against someone as powerful and connected as Counselor Thane. Still, she squared her shoulders and reminded herself of everything they had risked to reach this point, everything that depended on the next hour. When they finally returned to the great council chamber, it looked different from how Nora remembered it earlier that day. Fewer delegates filled the seats, this being an emergency session rather than a full assembly, but those present carried an unmistakable air of seriousness, aware that emergency hearings were rare enough to signal something significant. Selvena Croy stood near the central floor, having successfully gathered the minimum quorum required, and beside her stood the human delegation, Nora at the front, flanked by Daniel, Grace, and Owen, with Lucy watching anxiously from the observation gallery, alongside a much larger group of human onlookers than had attended the earlier vote. Word of what happened had clearly spread across the station. At the high seat, Counselor Thane sat with his usual composed stillness, though Nora thought she detected a subtle tightness around his glassy features that had not been there before, a tension that told her he understood exactly what was coming. "This emergency session is called to order," announced a council administrator standing near the high seat, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustics. "Delegate Selvena Croy has sponsored a petition on behalf of the human delegation, challenging the validity of the resource claim against the system designated Earth. The floor recognizes the petitioners." Selvena stepped forward first, her musical voice calm and measured as she outlined the formal legal basis for the challenge, explaining that new evidence had emerged suggesting the original survey underlying the resource claim was fundamentally flawed, potentially invalidating the entire claim rather than merely delaying its execution. Then she gestured for Nora to step forward, and Nora walked to the center of the chamber floor, the same spot where she had knelt in desperate silence only hours earlier. This time, she stood tall. "Members of the council," she began, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Earlier today, I stood in this chamber and begged you to give my world more time. I understand now that emotion alone was never going to be enough to change this outcome. So today, I am not asking you to feel sympathy for us. I am asking you to look at the facts." She nodded to Owen, who stepped forward and activated a large display above the chamber floor, projecting the technical analysis they had worked so hard to prepare. The image showed a side-by-side comparison of the survey ship's sensor capabilities against the strength of the human broadcast signal that should have been detected during the original survey. "The claim against Earth rests entirely on a survey conducted decades ago, declaring our system uninhabited," Nora continued. "But this broadcast signal, dated 12 years before that survey took place, would have been clearly detectable by the very equipment used during that mission. There is no scientific explanation for how a competent survey could have missed it. Either the scan was never properly conducted, or its results were deliberately falsified." A ripple of murmurs spread through the assembled delegates, some leaning forward with obvious interest, others exchanging quiet, uncertain glances. Nora pressed forward before the moment could slip away. "If the original survey was flawed or falsified, then the resource claim built upon it holds no legal standing whatsoever, under this council's own established laws regarding claim validity. We are not asking for mercy. We are asking this council to enforce its own rules fairly, exactly as it would for any other member species." For a long moment, silence held the chamber. Then Councillor Thane rose slowly from the high seat, his expression carefully composed once more. "A serious accusation," he said, his deep voice rolling across the chamber, without any apparent alarm. "Falsifying survey data is a grave offense under council law. Before this assembly accepts such a claim, it deserves to hear a full accounting of how this evidence was obtained. I understand certain individuals accessed restricted engineering records without proper authorization earlier today. Perhaps the council should examine the legitimacy of the evidence itself, rather than simply the conclusions drawn from it." Nora felt a flicker of fear, recognizing exactly what Thane was attempting, shifting the focus away from the falsified survey and onto the manner in which they had uncovered it. Before she could respond, Grace stepped forward calmly. The engineering specifications in question were retrieved from physical backup records stored within this very station, in a location any authorized delegate is permitted to access, Grace said firmly. The digital copy of those same records was restricted only hours before we sought them, a restriction applied without any stated justification, at a time suspiciously convenient for anyone wishing to prevent this evidence from coming to light. Perhaps this council should examine who requested that restriction, and why. A fresh wave of murmurs spread through the chamber, sharper this time, several delegates glancing toward Councillor Thane with new curiosity. Thane's composed expression flickered, just slightly, before settling back into stillness. "This is a serious accusation to level against a sitting council member," he said, his tone hardening slightly. "As is falsifying a survey to seize a system's resources under false pretenses," Selvena replied evenly. "Perhaps this council should allow a full independent review of both matters, rather than dismissing either without proper investigation." The administrator standing near the high seat raised a hand, calling for order as the murmuring grew louder. "This is a matter for formal investigation," she announced. "However, given the immediate and irreversible nature of the fleet's approach toward Earth's system, this council must first decide whether sufficient doubt exists regarding the original claim's validity to justify an emergency delay, pending that full investigation." Nora held her breath as the administrator turned to address the assembled delegates directly. "All those in favor of granting an emergency delay of resource extraction, pending full investigation into the validity of the original survey, signal now." A tense silence followed, and then, one by one, hands and various alien equivalents began rising throughout the chamber. Nora watched with her heart in her throat, as delegate after delegate signaled their support, some hesitant, clearly influenced by the strength of the evidence, rather than any particular sympathy for Earth itself, others more decisive, perhaps swayed by growing suspicion toward Councillor Thane's obvious discomfort. The count came back swiftly, the administrator's voice ringing out across the chamber. "The motion passes. Resource extraction is delayed immediately, pending full investigation. An emergency recall order will be transmitted to the fleet-designated Aurelian Vanguard without delay." Relief crashed over Nora so powerfully that her legs nearly buckled beneath her again, though this time from joy rather than despair. Beside her, Grace let out a shaky breath, and Owen closed his eyes briefly, his shoulders sagging with released tension. Behind them, in the observation gallery, a quiet cheer rose from the gathered human onlookers, quickly hushed by the formality of the chamber, but unmistakable nonetheless. Councillor Thane remained standing at the high seat, his expression unreadable, though Nora thought she saw something cold and calculating pass briefly across his glassy features, before he inclined his head stiffly toward the administrator and resumed his seat without another word. The formal session concluded shortly afterward, procedural matters handled quickly amid the charged atmosphere of the chamber, and Nora found herself surrounded almost immediately by Daniel, Grace, Owen, and Lucy, all of them embracing in a tight, exhausted circle of relief and disbelief. "We did it," Grace said, half laughing, half crying. "We actually did it." Selvena approached them as the chamber slowly emptied, her large, dark eyes warm with quiet satisfaction. "This is only the beginning of the formal process," she cautioned gently. "A full investigation will take time, and Councillor Thane will not simply accept this outcome without seeking ways to protect himself. But for now, your world is safe, and that is no small thing." Nora turned to her, gratitude swelling in her chest.
We could never have done this without you.
You risked everything to help us. Selvena's expression softened further. Your world reminded me why I chose to serve on this council in the first place, not merely to protect my own people's interests, but to ensure that no species faces this council alone, especially not in its earliest, most vulnerable years. I only wish more of my colleagues remembered that as clearly. As they finally left the chamber together, stepping out into the wide corridor beyond, Nora found herself pausing near a large viewport overlooking open space, where distant stars glittered against endless darkness. Somewhere out there, an entire fleet was reversing course, turning away from a small blue planet that had no idea how close it had come to losing everything. Daniel came to stand beside her, following her gaze out toward the stars. You didn't just save Earth today, he said quietly. You changed something here, something bigger than just our world's status. People are already talking about what happened in that chamber, both times. The plea that broke protocol, and the evidence that proved you right. Other newer species are watching too. I think today showed everyone, human and otherwise, that this council can be challenged, and that standing together actually means something. Nora considered his words, watching the distant stars twinkle silently beyond the viewport glass. She thought back to the moment she had dropped to her knees in that vast, indifferent chamber, certain in that instant that she had failed completely. She had not understood then that the true turning point had not been the alien council's rejection, but the way her own people had risen to stand beside her afterward, refusing to let that moment be the end of the story. We're not done, she said finally, turning to look at the small group gathered around her. People who had, in the span of a single extraordinary day, become something far stronger than mere colleagues. There will be more challenges ahead. More votes we might lose before we win. But we face this one together, and that matters more than I understood this morning. Grace nodded firmly, wiping the last traces of tears from her eyes. Then we keep standing together. Every time. Owen managed a tired, genuine smile, still clutching the small case that had carried the evidence responsible for saving an entire world. Lucy, standing slightly apart from the group as if uncertain whether she still belonged among them, looked surprised when Nora reached out and gently pulled her into the circle. You're part of this too, Nora said warmly. You risked your position, your entire career, for people you barely knew. Earth owes you more than we can ever properly repay. Lucy's eyes glistened, though she managed a small, embarrassed laugh. I just did what felt right. I suppose that's really all any of us did today. As the group finally made their way back through the winding corridors of the council station, leaving the great chamber behind them, Nora glanced back one final time, toward the massive doors where, only that morning, she had knelt in desperate, wordless fear, uncertain whether anyone in that vast, indifferent gathering of worlds would ever truly listen. The aliens had not listened, not at first, not when it mattered most in that terrifying first 90 seconds, but her own people had, standing quietly behind her in that gallery, refusing to look away, refusing to let her stand alone. And in the end, that quiet, unshakable solidarity had proven strong enough to change everything. Earth was safe, for now. And for the first time since joining the wider community of worlds among the stars, humanity understood something it had never quite grasped before, that survival among the stars would never depend on the sympathy of others, but on the simple, unbreakable choice to stand together, no matter how small, no matter how outmatched, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. Nora Ellison walked away from the council chamber that day carrying not the memory of defeat, but the quiet, powerful knowledge that her world, her people, had finally found their voice among the stars, and that voice, once found, would never again be silenced so easily.